The fastest way to discover who truly loves you is to watch who stays when your perfect day falls apart. The scent of white roses filled the air as I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my hands over the lace of my wedding dress for what felt like the 100th time. Outside, sunlight poured through the stained glass windows of the chapel, painting soft colors across the floor. Everything was exactly the way I had imagined it. The flowers were perfect. The music was ready. The guests had arrived. In less than an hour, I was supposed to become Olivia Bennet's wife. For months I had planned every detail of this day. Every flower arrangement. Every table setting. Every tiny piece of a future I thought was finally within reach. My phone vibrated on the vanity beside me. I smiled automatically, expecting a sweet message from my fiancé. Instead, the screen displayed a text from my cousin. The message contained only 3 words. Check your email. A strange feeling settled in my stomach. I opened my inbox. At first, I did not understand what I was seeing. Then my heart stopped. There was a video attachment. My hands trembled as I pressed play. The room suddenly felt too warm, too small, too quiet. The video lasted less than a minute. It was enough. When it ended, I stared at the screen without blinking. My fiancé was not where he was supposed to be. He was not preparing for our wedding. He was with another woman. The date stamp showed the previous night. Less than 12 hours before our ceremony. I felt the blood drain from my face. The phone nearly slipped from my fingers. For several seconds I could not breathe. A knock sounded at the door. "Olivia," my mother called. "Everyone is waiting. Waiting." The word echoed through my head. I stood up slowly. My reflection looked unfamiliar now. The same dress. The same makeup. The same woman. Yet somehow everything had changed. I opened the door and stepped into the hallway. Guests filled the chapel. Laughter drifted through the building. People smiled as they passed. None of them knew. Not yet. I found my fiancé's best man near the entrance. The panic on his face told me everything before he even spoke. "Olivia." He looked away. "I am so sorry." My stomach dropped. "Where is he?" Silence. Then another voice answered from behind me. "He left." I turned and saw my sister standing there. Her expression was not shocked. It was uncomfortable, as if she had known before I did. One by one, pieces began falling into place. The strange behavior. The unanswered questions. The excuses. People knew. Maybe not everyone. But enough. My wedding day collapsed around me in complete silence. No dramatic scene. No screaming. Just the sound of my heart breaking while the guests slowly realized something was wrong. I walked out of the chapel before anyone could stop me. The afternoon sun felt cold against my skin. Tears blurred the parking lot. I kept walking until I reached a row of empty benches beneath a large oak tree. Then I sat down and stared at the ground. My phone would not stop vibrating. Calls. Messages. Questions. Apologies. None of them mattered anymore. That was when I noticed him. A tall man dressed in a simple dark suit sat alone near the back of the property, watching the chaos from a distance. Unlike everyone else, he was not whispering, not staring, not judging. He was simply observing. And when our eyes met across the courtyard, I had the strange feeling that he already knew exactly what had happened. For several minutes, I sat beneath the oak tree pretending not to notice the stranger. It should have been easy. The property was large. Guests were leaving in small groups. Family members moved between the chapel and reception hall carrying flowers, gifts, and whispered conversations. Yet somehow my attention kept drifting back to the man sitting alone near the rear courtyard. He did not seem connected to anyone. He was not comforting relatives. He was not offering opinions. He was not even looking at his phone. He simply sat there with his hands folded loosely in front of him, watching the aftermath of my ruined wedding as if he were reading the final chapter of a book. My phone vibrated again. This time it was my mother. I stared at the screen before answering. "Olivia, where are you?" Her voice sounded strained. "Outside. People are asking questions." Let out a small laugh that surprised even me. "I am sure they are." Silence followed. Then she lowered her voice. "Your father thinks you should come back inside." Of course he did. My father believed appearances could solve almost anything. Why? I asked. Because hiding out here is not helping. The words landed harder than she intended. Not because they were cruel. Because they were familiar. My entire life, whenever something painful happened, someone always seemed more concerned with how it looked than how it felt. I am not hiding, I said quietly. I am trying to breathe. My mother sighed. We can talk later. Then she hung up. Not are you okay? Not I am sorry. Just later. I lowered the phone slowly and looked toward the chapel. Through the glass doors I could see guests gathering in clusters. Some looked sympathetic. Others simply looked curious. The difference hardly mattered anymore. A shadow crossed the ground beside me. I looked up. The stranger stood a few feet away. Close, he looked older than I originally thought. Mid-30s perhaps. Dark hair. Calm gray eyes. Simple navy suit. Nothing flashy. Nothing that demanded attention. Yet there was something about him that made people instinctively notice when he entered a space. Everyone keeps asking how I know you, he said. His voice was smooth and steady. I thought I should introduce myself before rumors become more interesting than reality. Despite everything, I almost smiled. And do you know me? No. He sat down on the opposite end of the bench. But I know what a disaster looks like. I stared at him. That is a strange opening line. It is an honest one. For a moment, neither of us spoke. A warm breeze carried the scent of roses from the reception hall. Somewhere behind us, a child laughed. The normal sounds of life continued while mine felt completely suspended. You were at the ceremony? I asked. I was invited by a business associate. He glanced toward the chapel. Although technically there was no ceremony. I looked away. The embarrassment returned immediately. You do not have to pretend this is not humiliating. His expression remained calm. I am not pretending. The simplicity of the answer surprised me. Most people had spent the afternoon trying to make me feel better. He was simply acknowledging reality. Somehow that felt kinder. Then his eyes moved toward the stack of unopened messages on my phone screen. What are you going to do now? The question should have been simple. Instead, it felt impossible. Because the truth was, I had spent so much time planning a future with someone else that I no longer knew what my own future looked like. And for the first time all day, I realized the answer might change everything. The stranger's question followed me long after he left the bench. What are you going to do now? By the time the sun began sinking behind the trees, I still did not have an answer. The reception hall stood nearly empty. Staff members cleared tables. Flower arrangements I had designed myself were being packed into boxes. Everywhere I looked, I saw pieces of a future that no longer existed. I should have gone home. Instead, I found myself wandering through the ballroom one last time. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Soft music still drifted from hidden speakers. Everything looked beautiful. That was the cruel part. Nothing on the outside reflected the disaster underneath. My wedding coordinator approached carefully. Olivia, there is something you need to see. My stomach tightened. At this point, I was not sure how the day could become worse. She handed me a folder containing final invoices and contracts. As I flipped through the paperwork, my heart sank. Most of the deposits had been paid. Not all. Several large balances remained outstanding. The venue, catering adjustments, vendor penalties. The numbers blurred together. There has to be a mistake, I whispered. The coordinator looked uncomfortable. Your fiancé signed several agreements using both names. I stared at the pages. My name appeared beside obligations I barely remembered discussing. The wedding had not only broken my heart, it had created a financial disaster. I lowered myself into a chair. For months, I had trusted someone else to help build our future. Now I was discovering how much damage one person could leave behind simply by walking away. How much? I finally asked. The answer made my chest tighten. It was more money than I could comfortably handle alone. Not impossible, but enough to change everything. Enough to erase years of savings. I will figure it out, I said quietly. The coordinator nodded sympathetically and walked away. Figure it out. That had become the theme of my life. I sat there staring at the paperwork until another shadow appeared beside the table. I did not need to look up. Somehow I already knew. You have the same expression people wear before tax audits, the stranger said. Despite myself, I laughed softly. That bad? Possibly worse. He sat across from me and glanced toward the stack of contracts. His eyes moved quickly over the pages. Too quickly. Almost as if reading complicated financial documents was second nature. Wedding liabilities? He asked. Unfortunately. Silence settled between us. Then he leaned back slightly. How much trouble are we talking about? I should not have answered. I barely knew him. Yet something about his calm presence made honesty feel easier. When I told him the amount, he did not react. Not even a little. Most people would have looked shocked. He simply nodded thoughtfully. Manageable. I stared at him. Manageable. Yes. For who? A faint smile touched his face. Fair question. For a moment he seemed lost in thought. Then he reached into his jacket and removed a business card. The card was surprisingly plain. No flash logo. No impressive title. Just a name. Nathan Hayes. And a phone number. He placed it on the table between us. Call me tomorrow. I frowned. Why? His gray eyes met mine. Calm. Certain. Mysterious. Because I think I may have a solution to both of your problems. Then he stood up and walked away before I could ask what he meant. The business card sat on my kitchen counter for almost 24 hours. I looked at it while making coffee. I looked at it while sorting bills. I looked at it while trying and failing to sleep. Nathan Hayes. A name that should have meant nothing to me somehow occupied far too much space in my thoughts. By the following afternoon, curiosity finally defeated caution. Called the number. He answered on the second ring. I was beginning to think you lost the card. I stared at my phone. How are you not surprised this is me? A hint of amusement entered his voice. Because people rarely ignore solutions when they need one. 2 hours later, I found myself sitting across from him in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river. The place was elegant without being flashy. Large windows filled the room with afternoon sunlight. Soft music played in the background. Nathan looked exactly the same as he had at the wedding. Simple dark jacket. Calm expression. No expensive watch displayed for attention. No signs of wealth. No signs of anything really. He seemed like a man determined not to stand out, which only made him more interesting. A server approached our table. The moment she noticed Nathan, her posture changed slightly. Respect. Familiarity. Almost nervousness. Nathan greeted her by name. She smiled immediately. Another small detail that did not quite fit. You said you had a solution, I reminded him after the menus disappeared. Nathan folded his hands together. I did. I waited. He studied me for a moment. Tell me something first. If you could walk away from every problem created by that wedding, would you? I almost laughed. That sounds like a trick question. Most important questions do. I looked out the window toward the river. Of course I would. Nathan nodded slowly. Good. Then he reached into a leather folder and slid several documents across the table. My stomach tightened immediately. Legal paperwork. Contracts. Signatures. The last thing I wanted to see. What is this? I asked. A proposal. You are making that sound much more dramatic than necessary. Possibly. His expression remained perfectly serious. I opened the first page. Halfway through the first paragraph I stopped reading. Then I read it again. Surely I had misunderstood. My eyes moved back to the top of the page. Temporary marriage agreement. I looked up so quickly that I nearly dropped the document. Nathan remained completely calm. Absolutely not. The answer came instantly. You have not finished reading. I do not need to. He leaned back slightly. A 1-year legal marriage. No romantic expectations. Complete financial protection from your wedding liabilities. At the end of 12 months we both walk away. I stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am entirely serious. The river sparkled beyond the windows while my heart pounded in disbelief. Every sensible thought in my head screamed that this was impossible. Ridiculous. Completely irrational. Yet Nathan looked as though he were discussing a routine business arrangement. Why would you do this for me? I asked quietly. For the first time since meeting him, something unreadable passed through his eyes. Then he answered with a simple honesty that somehow made the proposal even more unsettling. Because I need this marriage too. The proposal followed me home like a storm cloud that refused to move on. For 2 days I carried the folder from room to room without opening it again. Every time I looked at it, the same thought returned. No reasonable person agrees to marry a stranger. Yet every time I reviewed my situation, another thought followed close behind. No reasonable person offers a solution like that either. By the third morning, curiosity won. I called Nathan and asked him to explain everything. We met at a small coffee shop near the edge of town. Unlike the elegant restaurant where he had presented the agreement, this place was simple. Wooden tables. Local artwork. Fresh pastries behind glass displays. Nathan arrived exactly on time, carrying a notebook and wearing the same kind of understated clothes he always seemed to prefer. Nothing about him suggested wealth or status. If I had passed him on the street, I would have assumed he was an accountant or a teacher. "You came," he said as he sat down. "I have questions." I expected that. I opened the folder between us. "Start with the most important one. Why do you need this marriage?" Nathan looked out the window briefly before answering. "Certain legal matters become easier if I am married." I narrowed my eyes. "That is not an answer." To my surprise, he smiled. "It is technically an answer. A frustrating one." The smile faded, replaced by his usual calm expression. "There are family obligations involved. Business complications. Nothing dangerous. Nothing dishonest. I simply need a spouse for 12 months. The explanation sounded incomplete. Not false. Just incomplete. "And you chose me?" I asked. "A woman you met during the worst day of her life?" Nathan folded his hands together. "You are honest." I stared at him. "That cannot be the entire reason." "No." His gaze met mine. "You are also someone who understands what it feels like when plans collapse without warning." The words settled quietly between us. Somehow, he understood exactly where to aim when he spoke. We spent another hour discussing details. Living arrangements. Boundaries. Expectations. The more we talked, the stranger the situation became. Yet Nathan approached every subject with practical patience. He never pressured me. Never rushed me. Never treated me like someone desperate enough to accept anything. When the conversation finally ended, I walked with him toward the parking lot. A black sedan pulled into a reserved space nearby. Before Nathan could reach it, a sharply dressed man stepped out and hurried toward us. The man's posture changed immediately when he saw Nathan. Respect. Complete respect. "Sir," he said, "the meeting has been moved to 4 o'clock. Nathan nodded once. The man handed him a folder and waited as though receiving instructions from someone far more important than he appeared. Then the man noticed me. "Good afternoon." His tone remained professional, but there was unmistakable curiosity in his eyes. Nathan thanked him and the man left without another word. I watched the car disappear before turning back toward Nathan. "Friend of yours?" I asked. For the briefest moment, something unreadable crossed his face. Then he slipped the folder under his arm. "Something like that." And as we stood in the afternoon sunlight, I became certain that Nathan Hayes was hiding much more than he was willing to admit. A week later, I signed the agreement. Even now, I am not entirely sure which emotion pushed me across the finish line. Exhaustion, curiosity, hope, maybe all three. What I do know is that 2 days after signing, Nathan and I stood inside a small courthouse with a judge, 2 witnesses, and absolutely none of the expectations that had destroyed my first wedding day. No flowers. No elaborate decorations. No crowded guest list. Just paperwork, quiet promises, and a decision that felt strangely peaceful. When the ceremony ended, Nathan shook my hand before he did anything else. I stared at him in disbelief. "Did you just shake your wife's hand?" For the first time since meeting him, a genuine smile appeared. I was trying to be respectful. I laughed despite myself. The sound echoed through the hallway as we walked outside. It was the first happy memory I had created in weeks. The following days settled into an unexpected rhythm. Nathan rented a modest townhouse on the edge of the city for us. Not a mansion. Not a luxury penthouse. Just a comfortable home with a small backyard and a front porch. Everything about it seemed intentionally ordinary. The more time I spent around him, the more confusing he became. Some days he looked like a man who worked quietly behind a desk. Other days, strange details appeared. Expensive cars occasionally dropped him off before disappearing again. Phone calls arrived at odd hours. People treated him with an unusual level of respect. Yet whenever I asked questions, Nathan redirected the conversation with frustrating skill. One evening, I arrived home from work to find him standing in the kitchen attempting to cook dinner. The smell alone suggested things were not going well. Should I call emergency services? I asked. Nathan looked up from the stove. That seems premature. Smoke drifted lazily toward the ceiling. I disagree. 20 minutes later, we were eating takeout on the porch steps while the ruined dinner sat forgotten inside. The summer air felt warm against my skin. Fireflies flickered across the yard. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then Nathan surprised me. You smile more now. I looked at him. Is that an observation or a complaint? An observation. His gaze remained on the street ahead. You smiled very little when we met. The comment should not have affected me. Somehow it did. As he was right. Somewhere between the disaster of my wedding and the strange stability of this new life, something inside me had begun healing. Slowly, carefully, like a broken bone learning how to carry weight again. My phone buzzed suddenly. The screen displayed a name I had hoped never to see. My former fiancé. I stared at it without answering. Nathan noticed immediately. His expression did not change, but something in his posture became noticeably still. Bad news? He asked quietly. I declined the call. Seconds later, another message appeared. Then another. My stomach tightened. Nathan watched my reaction without pushing for details. Finally, I handed him the phone. He read the message once and returned it. His jaw tightened slightly. It seems he wants to talk. I looked away toward the darkening street. That makes one of us. Then a black luxury vehicle slowly pulled to the curb across from the townhouse, and the moment Nathan saw it, the calm expression on his face disappeared completely. The luxury vehicle remained parked across the street for less than a minute. Then the rear door opened and a woman stepped out. She looked elegant, confident, and completely out of place on our quiet block. Nathan rose from the porch so quickly that I immediately understood one thing. Whoever she was, she mattered. The woman crossed the street without hesitation. Her heels clicked against the sidewalk while the driver remained beside the car. I watched Nathan carefully. The calm, controlled man I had spent weeks getting to know suddenly looked guarded. Not nervous. Not afraid. Guarded. There was a difference. Nathan, the woman said. Her voice carried familiarity. We need to talk. Nathan glanced toward me before answering. This is not a good time. The woman followed his gaze and finally noticed me. Something flickered across her face. Surprise. Curiosity. Perhaps both. You are married? She asked. Nathan's expression hardened slightly. What do you want, Victoria? The name hung in the air. Victoria. For some reason, hearing him say it felt important. She folded her arms. Your grandfather is furious. Nathan sighed quietly. That sounds like a problem for him. I stared between them. Grandfather. Fury. Expensive car. Strange. Family obligations. The pieces still did not fit together, but the picture was becoming more complicated. Victoria looked at me again. You have no idea who he really is, do you? The question landed like a stone in my stomach. Nathan's jaw tightened immediately. That is enough. Victoria gave a small laugh. Interesting. Then she turned back toward him. The board meeting is in 3 days. If you do not show up, they will make decisions without you. Board meeting. Another strange detail. Before I could ask anything, Nathan stepped forward. I said I would handle it. For the first time, Victoria seemed satisfied. She nodded once. Do not wait too long. Without another word, she returned to the vehicle. Seconds later, the car disappeared down the street. Silence settled across the porch. I looked at Nathan. He looked at the road. Neither of us spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. Board meeting. Nathan exhaled slowly. Complicated family business. Grandfather. Also complicated. I waited. He clearly knew I was waiting. Yet instead of explaining, He sat back down on the porch steps and stared toward the darkening sky. The avoidance irritated me more than it should have. You know, I said quietly, most people would consider honesty useful in a marriage. A faint smile touched his face. Most people would not agree to marry a stranger. Unfortunately, he had a point. Days passed, but the encounter refused to leave my mind. Then the situation became even more complicated. My former fiancé began calling daily. Flowers appeared at my workplace. Messages arrived through mutual friends. Even my parents started encouraging me to meet with him. One Sunday afternoon, my mother sat across from me in her kitchen and sighed dramatically. People make mistakes, Olivia. Leaving me at the altar was not a mistake. It was a choice. She looked away. The conversation ended there. That night, I returned home emotionally exhausted. Nathan was waiting on the porch. 2 cups of coffee sat beside him. He handed one to me without asking questions. Somehow, that simple act felt more supportive than every conversation I had endured all week. Then he looked at me and said something that made my heart pause. You do not owe your future to people who abandoned you in the past. 2 weeks later, Nathan finally agreed to take me with him to the meeting Victoria had mentioned. He never called it important. That alone made me suspicious. The event was being held at a luxury hotel downtown. As we drove through the city, I noticed something unusual. Nathan was quieter than normal. Not nervous. Focused. The closer we got, the more obvious it became that this was not an ordinary business gathering. Luxury vehicles filled the entrance. Security personnel stood discreetly near every doorway. Men and women in expensive suits moved through the lobby with practiced confidence. I adjusted the sleeve of my dress and looked at Nathan. Are you going to tell me what this is? He glanced toward me. A meeting. I laughed. You are impossible. To my surprise, he smiled. That has been mentioned before. The ballroom occupied the entire top floor of the hotel. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Hundreds of guests filled the room. Investors, executives, industry leaders, people whose names regularly appeared in business magazines. The moment Nathan and I stepped through the entrance, something strange happened. Conversations stopped. Not completely, just enough for me to notice. Heads turned. Eyes followed us. A woman carrying a champagne glass immediately moved aside to clear our path. Then a man crossed the room with obvious urgency. Mr. Hayes. He extended his hand respectfully. Nathan shook it. Another executive approached. Then another. Within minutes, a line had formed around us. I stood there completely confused while powerful people greeted Nathan with a level of respect I had never seen before. Nobody treated him like an ordinary businessman. They treated him like the most important person in the room. My heart began beating faster. Pieces of every strange moment from the past several weeks started connecting. The luxury car. Victoria. The board meeting. The employees. The phone calls. The way restaurant managers knew him. The way people listened whenever he spoke. Nathan. I whispered. What is happening? Before he could answer, the lights dimmed. A presenter stepped onto the stage. The massive screen behind him illuminated the ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, the presenter announced. Please join me in welcoming the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of Hayes Global Enterprises. Applause erupted throughout the room. I turned toward the stage automatically. Then I froze. A photograph appeared on the screen. Nathan's photograph. My breath caught instantly. The screen displayed his full name beneath a list of achievements and companies worth billions of dollars. Billionaire entrepreneur. Chief Executive Officer. Chairman. Industry leader. The room rose to its feet. Hundreds of people stood in respect. And beside me, the man I had married looked suddenly unfamiliar. Not because he had changed, because I was finally seeing who he truly was. Nathan looked at me instead of the crowd. Not the stage. Not the executives. Me. His expression was calm, but something vulnerable existed beneath it. Olivia, he said quietly. I can explain. I stared at him while the applause continued around us. Every secret, every unanswered question, every missing piece finally clicked into place. The stranger from my wedding day had never been an ordinary man at all. The applause seemed to last forever. Hundreds of people stood around us while I remained frozen in place, staring at the man I thought I knew. Nathan Hayes. My husband. The quiet stranger from my wedding day. The man who burned dinner in our kitchen and drank coffee with me on the porch. The man who listened when nobody else did. He was also one of the most powerful business leaders in the country. Somehow both versions were true at the same time. I barely heard the presentation. My thoughts moved too fast. Every conversation replayed in my mind with new meaning. Every mystery suddenly made sense. When the event finally ended, Nathan and I stood alone on a private terrace overlooking the city skyline. The lights below stretched for miles beneath the night sky. For several moments, neither of us spoke. The silence felt different now. Heavier. You should be angry, Nathan said quietly. Looked at him. I am. He nodded once. Fair. The honesty caught me off guard. No excuses. No attempts to justify himself. Just acceptance. I walked toward the railing and folded my arms. How long were you planning to keep this from me? Nathan joined me several feet away. I never intended to keep it forever. That is not an answer. He looked out over the city. I know. The wind moved gently across the terrace. Finally, he spoke again. Do you remember the first question you asked me at the wedding? I frowned. Probably. You asked if I knew you. I remembered. Yes. Nathan nodded. The truth is, I knew enough. I waited. I knew you were having the worst day of your life. I knew people were talking about you instead of helping you. I knew you were being judged for something that was not your fault. His voice remained calm. And I knew that if you learned who I was immediately, you would never trust my reasons for being there. The words settled quietly between us. Deep down I knew he was right. If I had discovered on that first day that Nathan Hayes was a billionaire CEO, I would have questioned every act of kindness, every conversation, every offer of help. The marriage was real to me, he continued, even when it started as an agreement. My chest tightened. Nathan rarely spoke about emotions. Hearing him do it now made every word feel important. Why me? I asked softly. Out of all the people in the world. He smiled faintly. Because you were the first person in years who spoke to me like I was ordinary. Tears blurred my vision unexpectedly. Not because of his wealth. Not because of the secret. Because I finally understood. Nathan had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted something from him. Money. Influence. Opportunity. Status. I had wanted none of those things because I never knew they existed. I cared about the man, not the title. The realization changed everything. My parents called today, I admitted. Nathan looked at me. And they heard about the event. I laughed softly. Apparently everyone has. A warm expression crossed his face. I imagined they were surprised. Very. For the first time I smiled. A real smile. But none of that matters anymore. Nathan studied me carefully. No. I shook my head. The man who stood beside me when my life fell apart was worth choosing before I knew any of this. Emotion flickered across his face. Rare. Unguarded. Real. I stepped closer and took his hand. The city lights sparkled around us while the distance between us disappeared completely. Looking back, the richest thing about Nathan Hayes was never his fortune. It was the fact that when everyone else walked away, he stayed.